from spear phishing. I'm going to use a previous presentation as kind of our organizing set of slides here, because the situation that Eric described is only a little bit different from what we see in a lot of other venues. So real quick, most of you know about CLA, a little bit about our security practice. The security practice has been in place for 20 plus years. We focus on penetration testing, vulnerability assessment, IT risk, and we have a dedicated forensics and incident response program. So we've got a group of good guy computer hackers whose sole job is to help our clients keep abreast of these situations. Talk a little bit about what's going on, the hacker motivations. I'm going to steal a little bit from a very, very old book called The Art of War by Sun Tzu. We need to know what our enemy, our attacker's motivations are to better inform ourselves so that we can defend against those. So I'm going to talk about those motivations and some of the techniques. I'm going to use a couple of case studies and examples. And from those, hopefully we can learn some lessons others have suffered the hard way, and also use those as an opportunity for people to ask questions. There's been a pretty significant change over the last 5 to 6 years. I've been doing penetration testing for almost 17, 18 years now. And up until about 5 or 6 years ago, when we had a cyber event, a breach, a hacking event, it was embarrassing. It was maybe a little concerning, but we weren't losing money for the most part. Your typical hacker was a college or high school age kid looking to show how smart they are, had an axe to grind. Look, you can't keep me out, Microsoft. I'm better than you are. About 5 or 6 years ago, that changed as organized crime figured out how to make money at computer hacking. And so as they figured that out, organized crime has moved into a mode where they treat cyber hacking as a business. It's a business line that they have along with drug dealing and human trafficking and arms dealing and all these other things. And so their hacking is getting more sophisticated. At times it's more hands-on. Smaller and smaller organizations are being targeted, and they have a black market economy underneath all this to support it. Everyone's a target, and in the end, most of the successful breaches have some form of email phishing as a root cause. So as we look through that, talk a little bit about cybercrime as an industry, because again, we want to understand who we're dealing with. They developed a wholesale to retail distribution chain that would make Walmart envious. They have suppliers, they have different markets, they have service providers. They will do financing of you purchasing a block of stolen IDs to turn around and make money at. They have websites set up to exchange goods, to sell goods, to provide services. And they have a proliferation of business models to support all this. If we take the large, slew of retail breaches that occurred back in late 2013, Target, Michael Crafts, there were a whole bunch of them. At the base of this was a scenario. This just comes out of what we've learned in the news and over time. Started out with a 20-something-year-old programmer who found a piece of malware, malicious software, already existing, and he recoded it. He spent about 50 to 60 hours recoding it and repurposing it. He turned around and he sold it to 60 different organized crime groups. So he's the coder. He distributes it, 60 different organized crime groups, for $2,000 a piece. So he's made $120,000 for his week or two of effort. Each of those groups, the malware as a service provider, the aggregators, they've all made a $2,000 investment. They're going to recoup their investment. So they hatch a variety of hacking schemes. They break into a lot of places like we saw. They steal volumes of credit card data, or they do other things. And instead of using that credit card data directly, what they do is they turn around and they sell it off to somebody else, an aggregator. That aggregator then lists for sale. We've got 10,000 new card numbers. If you buy them one at a time, they're $20 a piece. If you buy 1,000 at a time, they're $18 a piece. If you buy 10,000 of them, they're $10 a piece. Those people who buy them turn around to carders and distributors, and they will put them onto fake plastic. They will distribute them to street-level criminals who will run around and buy as much stuff as they can all at once before the fraud engines kick in. So they have a sophisticated business model here beginning to end. Everybody at each step of the line here is making money all along the way. So that's what we're up against. It's a foreign business trying to take advantage of weaknesses in our businesses. What are they after? The bulk of this has come down to the fact that they can steal information, data. So the ones that we see theft of PII and PFI. PII is personally identifiable information. PFI is personal financial information. This could be your personnel information, name, address, date of birth, social security number, significant others, family members, dependents. PFI is our banking information. So it could be banking information, credit card information, it could be any of that stuff. They can steal credit card transaction information. That's the stuff that makes the big splash in the news. A third category that doesn't get nearly the publicity is this idea of a member or corporate account takeover. Effectively, they steal our access as a business into our bank and the finances we can move around there. The last area we see a lot of, and this has seen a sharp rise just in the last year or so, is this concept of ransomware. So I'll talk through each of these and what they're trying to gain. The theft of PII or PFI, we see a variety of these events. We've got the large retail breaches. In these cases, they're going after the point-of-sale system where we swipe a credit card. They're stealing the cards as they flow through, and then they're selling them off down the line. We see breaches at higher education institutions. They are a treasure trove of data, name, address, date of birth, social security number for the people that go to school there, as well as all the finance information for tuition, room, and board services. They have it for the attendees as well as the people footing the bill, the parents. The Rockhurst University is a slightly different scenario, and it's a university, but I've seen this in other industries. Somebody in HR and finance got an email that looked like it came from the executive saying we need to forward all of our W-2 information to this third party so they can process W-2s and make them ready for our staff, and they fell for it. We see personnel breaches, OPM, Blue Cross, Primera, the bad guys hack in, usually through a phishing scheme, and they find and steal all of our personnel information. Again, they can use that to set up, to sell to others, to set up fraudulent credit. They can use that information to create and execute more focused hacking attacks, trying to get people to receive a message that looks convincing. And then we see healthcare systems getting breached. The healthcare systems largely are not being breached for the protected health information. The joke I tell is nobody's really interested in Randy's colonoscopy. It's not that intriguing. What they want is the PII and the PFI that the healthcare entity has. So in all of these instances, it's a variety of different data types they're trying to steal so that they can fraudulently reuse it. In many of these cases, they're stealing lists of email. The Target breach had 40 million credit card records stolen. They had over 70 million customer records that included name, address, and email account so that they could turn around and sell that so somebody could create a targeted phishing attack. we have this corporate account takeover scenario. You look at this list in person, I say, okay, what do these all have in common? They all have people who use computers to interact with their finances and their financial institutions. Large and small, every one of these has suffered some form of cyber fraud, either corporate account takeover or cyber fraud relating to a fraudulent payment because somebody received an email message. The smallest one on here, you know, it doesn't have to be huge. The Catholic Church parish had a bookkeeper who got phished and got malware on her PC, and she logs into the bank to do payroll, and they lost $10,000 in 2 fraudulent ACH payroll files. So not huge dollars in the scheme of things to a lot of us, a lot of money to that Catholic parish. The electrical contractor, national company with a line of business around distribution, a line of business around manufacturing, they got phished. They lost $5 million because somebody got into the finance people's systems, and those finance people had access to a line of credit, and money was drained out of the line of credit. And on and on and on. So when a lot of these CATOs, corporate account takeovers, end up getting litigated, and more of them are, what ends up occurring is an argument between the two sides around this clause in the Uniform Commercial Code. So when we look at electronic payments between financial institutions and businesses, the governing laws and regulations are in the Uniform Commercial Code. And it comes down to this phrase: were the security procedures commercially reasonable? So we look at 2 quick examples. Different electrical contractors, somebody in finance gets phished, malware is downloaded. They basically take over access and they steal $300,000. The contractor goes to court, sues the bank, says, hey, you know, we want our money back. Long story short, argues commercially reasonable controls. And in the end, what ended up occurring was that the contractor demonstrated that when this, in the same time period of this fraudulent transaction, somebody at the contractor actually tried to do payroll. They tried to log in. They got a little message, a pop-up screen saying, sorry, your system isn't up to date. There's a problem with the security certificate. Please try later. Well, payroll is a pretty important date, so the person in finance called the bank and said, I can't get in. There's a message. Website's down. Blah, blah, blah. People at the bank said, oh, yeah, it must be a problem with the website for maintenance. You know, who knows? Payroll is really important. Here's what we want you to do. Output your payroll file manually, bring it into the bank, and we'll process it. So Randy produces a manual file. He prints it out. He goes to the bank. He hands it off. People at the bank say, perfect. It's 1:30. We've got until 4 to process. You're good. And so Randy leaves. 20 minutes later, somebody at the bank calls the electrical contractor, phone number on record, and gets Tom. Hi, Tom. This is Joe at the bank. Somebody just dropped off a payroll file. Is this legitimate? And Tom says, yes, it is. The person at the bank says, can you tell me who delivered it? Oh, that was Randy. Perfect. What was the dollar amount? And they got the dollar amount right. So key control here is dual authorization and callback verification. Randy dropped it off, but Randy didn't verify. Somebody else verified. The bank looked at it, called back to verify it was legitimate through a different channel. And so the problem here is when the fraudulent electronic transaction occurred, no callback was performed. And so because of that, the contractor argued, and the courts found in their favor, the bank's controls are not commercially reasonable because effectively they're not following them, therefore they don't exist. In the exact opposite example, same initial set of events, the escrow company gets phished, malware downloaded, bad guys hijack the bank account, they steal $400,000. This one goes to litigation. The lower court finds in favor of the escrow company. The bank appeals because they argue that it was not properly described what their controls were. The bank said, when the escrow company engaged us with the online cash management, treasury management, whatever you want to call it, we had a risk conversation with them. We told the escrow company, here are all the controls we have in place at the bank. Here's a second set of controls that we expect you to have at your escrow company. You must safeguard your credentials. You must do this, this, and this. There's a third set of intermediate controls that are optional. They're up to you. Within those optional controls is this dual authorization and callback verification. And the escrow company said, no, too much time, too much effort. We don't have enough people. It's too inconvenient. We don't want those controls. And the bank said, that's perfectly fine. Here's a document. Please sign and acknowledge that we had this risk conversation, and you have chosen to not employ those controls, and therefore you accept the risk. And they signed that. And so the bank was able to document the risk conversation, the acceptance of risk, and that the contract, the escrow company did not want those controls. And therefore the courts found in favor of the bank, reversed the lower court finding, and in fact ordered the escrow company to pay the bank their legal fees. Well, what I talk about here is you don't want to be in either one of these situations. And so we really need to re-examine how we communicate and authorize and execute transactions, and what controls we have internally within finance to verify and authorize, and what controls the bank has in place. If the bank requests that you employ dual authorization, if they offer you a token, employ it, pay for it. More than one of these transactions. The $300,000 or the $400,000 is just the dollars out the door. That does not include the legal fees, the incident response fees, the changes in insurance that come along with these things. Different example. This actually happened to one of our manufacturing and distribution clients. They have a somewhat more sophisticated finance shop. They do a lot of payments by electronic payment. The person in finance got a message that appeared to come from NTMA, the organization that governs electronic payments, and the person clicked on the link and followed the link. The problem with this link, and I don't know if you guys can see my mouse moving, but that link actually goes to a place that ends up in .ru. .ru is a website hosted in Russia. I'm pretty sure that NTMA did not relocate their offices to Russia. And so what occurred here was they clicked on the link. The person in finance, when they clicked on the link, they actually got a pop-up message from their antivirus saying something wasn't right, and you got a little spin, and it said, message, file quarantined. The person in finance this happened to actually called the help desk, didn't get a live person, so they left a message. Nobody from the help desk got back to him until about a day and a half later. In the meantime, that malware that downloaded in the 30 seconds that the antivirus was trying to figure out and quarantine it, the malware downloaded something else that the antivirus didn't recognize. So even though the antivirus caught and eventually stopped the first piece, a second payload was delivered that was never caught. And so that second payload made some setting changes. And so when the person at the manufacturing distribution company went to do payroll, again, literally the next day, they couldn't get to the bank website. They got frustrated, and so they called the bank. And the people at the bank looked at their account and said, did you just create a $125,000 ACH file? No, we didn't. And so they locked the account. And in this case, they actually stopped the attack, which was a good thing. We learned several lessons through this process, a little bit different set of lessons. And this is something you can go back and talk to your IT folks about. The email message got in because of some weak filtering capabilities. What do I mean by that? This message did not really come from NTMA, it came from somewhere else. It had a link here that was was formatted to look like something but went to something else. In an email filter, you can set up some filters to block or flag some of those things. So that's the first problem. The second problem was the employee didn't have the training to recognize that when they put their mouse over this link and it pops up something.ru, that's a problem. They didn't recognize that, you know what, this isn't quite right. Instead of just following this link, I should go out to my already existing bookmark for NACHA, or I should call the bank and ask them if it's legitimate. So training. We had excessive user rights. So in two situations here, the user in question had local administrator rights to their PC. So if that's the case and I download malware, the malware has the same rights that I have. If I have admin rights, the malware has admin rights. I, as administrator, I can download and run software. So the malware can download and run, it can make changes, it can pull other files down on it. The second part of the excessive duties within the application is they did not have the dual, they didn't have the segregation of duty set up. So they had 6 people in finance. They should have set it up so that 3 can create ACH files, populate them, but they cannot authorize them or sign off. A different 3 people can authorize. In this particular instance, all 6 people could create and populate as well as authorize. They did it for convenience purposes, in case somebody's on vacation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This organization did not have an incident plan really in any way, shape, or form. New rule for all of you on the phone, you can write this down. If your people in finance call IT and say, I think I just downloaded something, I think I went to a website I shouldn't, those people in finance should have a special classification saying IT needs to respond to this immediately. They're the ones that have access to move money. They're the targets most of the time. In this case, the IT help desk got back to the person about a day and a half later. They just said, yeah, we checked the antivirus logs. It said it found it and cleaned it, so we don't need to do any further investigation. Well, I couldn't get to the bank website anymore. Oh, well, that must be something else. When they did finally find out it was a problem, they turned the person's computer off. When the person clicks on the link here and the malware downloads, today's modern malware only sits in running memory, number 1. It doesn't write to the hard disk. Number 2, as long as that PC is running and Sally's, initiated this malware, the operating system keeps track of all the different places the computer's talking to. So Sally's computer's talking to the finance server, it's talking to the file share, it's talking to 5 other things inside the company. It's talking to 6 things on the outside, including this .ru website. When they turn the computer off, they flush away that state information, and so we can't track exactly who's talking to what right now. Ideally, you leave the computer on, you get an incident response team in, whatever that means. We'll talk about that in a minute. The incident responders can pull the running memory before we shut it down, so we can know exactly what's there. Then we shut the computer down. Last thing we learned in this one, we actually sent somebody out 2 days later to do an investigation, and my guy Pete calls me 2 hours later and says, I have good news and bad news. Well, give it to me. He says, they have firewall logs. He said, is that the good news or the bad news? I'm a little confused. He's like, well, it's the good news they have firewall logs. So what's the bad news? Well, the bad news is they have so much traffic coming and going that their firewall logs are overwritten every 7 minutes. So if they had called us within 2 minutes and we got here within 2, we would have had 3 minutes of logs we could have worked with. So a lot of lessons learned here. Their email filtering needed to be tuned and tweaked. The employees needed some awareness training. They have some work ahead of them in terms of reconfiguring how users have access to minimize some of this. They got an incident response template from us that they turned around and developed and customized to them. And they're still investigating how do we redefine and configure our different logging facilities. A lot of defenses against the Cato itself. We've got a variety of authentication defenses, username, password, maybe a device with a number, or a lot of places now we see when you log in username and password, they send you a code as a text message, or they send you a phone call and you have to press a certain key to complete it. It's a very good control. Key, critical control, anywhere we're moving money. We need to have segregation of duties and dual authorization. Again, it's inconvenient. It takes more time, but these dual monitoring, dual authorization controls are tremendously effective at stopping these fraudulent transactions. Talk about ransomware here real quick, because this is kind of the new bad thing. Presbyterian Hospital in Los Angeles was in the news several weeks back. They went 2 weeks without access to their computer systems because somebody fell for a phishing scheme that introduced this ransomware. And they paid the ransom, $17,000. Usually starts out with a phishing message, might look like this. This is part of the training. There's all kinds of problems with this message. There is a very unusual grouping of recipients here. There's a couple of tax partners in Florida, there's an audit partner in Seattle, and Randy Rome is getting the same message. Makes no sense to me. We haven't been LarsonAllen for, God, I don't even know how long it's been now, 4 years. There's nothing in this message that gives me the context for what is this. Just, hey, open this, quick. CLA doesn't allow zip files anymore for this very reason. So several telltale signs here that something's wrong. Let's say, for example, none of us recognize that. We open the message. What happens next is the malware downloads and runs as Randy. So if Randy's an administrator, it has full access to Randy's hard drive, and then it's going to crawl down this network structure, and it's going to try and encrypt everything Randy has access to. So if Randy were an IT guy with super user rights, it would encrypt everything on the network. If Randy's just a general user, it's going to encrypt whatever Randy has access to. And then it's going to leave behind a message. Pay us your money, or we will not return your files to you. We won't give you the decryption key. What do we do about it? I'm going to jump back and forth again here. There's a couple of layers similar to what I talked about before. We need filtering capabilities. This message did not really come from Xerox Device 2 at LarsonAllen.com. It came from the outside. So the first thing would be our filter saying this came from the outside. We don't allow outside-in messages from @LarsonAllen or @CLAconnect.com or at our domain name because they can't be legitimate. Number two, in the past, CLA allowed zip files. We don't allow them anymore for this very reason. So the filter should either look at this and say zip file not allowed and block it, or zip file not allowed, strip the message out and add a message that says, hey, this came from the outside. Third thing we see more commonly is any message coming from the outside to an internal recipient has something added to it. Either a little note at the beginning of the subject that says external, or a colored header right here that says this is an external email. Be careful with links and attachments. So that's a filtering capability. We need users that are aware and savvy. Randy should recognize that this is wrong, that this is wrong, that this is wrong. If we don't filter it, if Randy doesn't recognize, we want to have minimized user access rights. We want it so that Randy is not local administrator. So if Randy's not local administrator, number one, the malware might not even be able to download and run. Certainly can't install anything new. Even if it can, the areas it has access to is highly limited by Randy's permissions. So nothing in the system directory or the operating system here. And ideally, nothing critical out here on the network, especially not the place where the backup files are stored. Let's say that it gets onto the network. Randy has minimized access rights. We want to make sure we have working backups that function and they're very well protected. So I am convinced, I don't know this for a fact, this is pure speculation. I'm convinced that the hospital in Los Angeles paid the ransom because somewhere out here on the network, let's just say right here in the common directory, the backups were stored on a network file share that wasn't locked down and the general users had access to it. So the malware encrypted the backups and they had no fallback position. I have seen that over and over again in the last year and a half. So filtering users that are aware, minimize user access rights, and a backup process that works. That's how we defend against ransomware. Here's another example of a phishing message. Again, the phishing is a predominant core theme here. What's wrong with this one? Unusual grouping, came from the outside. I've got an expensive cell phone bill. I got myself, 2 teenage sons, a wife, a mother-in-law, and a data tablet on my plan. My plan's expensive. My plan is never $2,300 a month. This is designed to cause alarm and make me act quickly without thinking. If I stop and think and I mouse over this link, I get a little pop-up box. Hey, where does this go? dancingdivaswear.com/Robin. That might be kind of interesting to look at. I would not suggest it. That website's been hacked and it's serving the malware that they're trying to download and run. So again, users that are aware and savvy. Our filtering may not catch this because this doesn't propose to come from a CLA address. It's an outside address. We can set up filtering to verify, did this really come from Verizon Wireless or not? That's a more sophisticated level of filtering. Sometimes a couple other messages I'm going to skip to get on to the other things. Here, you know, so it could be a Microsoft update. Click here, download, and run the update. It could be a Dropbox message. Hey, you recently tried to log in, you haven't changed your password in forever. Click here and change your password. Protect your account. This one's maybe more relevant to this group. We're seeing a lot of this right now. What ends up occurring is an executive's personal Gmail account actually gets broken into. They guess the password. Maybe they get malware on the person's personal PC. You know what the bad guy does is they log in to the email and they just watch. They watch and they lurk and they see what happens. Who does he correspond with? How does he use the message, the email? And they find out, hey, this guy's using this for business purposes. And so they figure out enough of what's going on to execute what we call an impersonation attack. They send the controller, the finance person, the message, hey, I'm on this trip in Rio. I need $15,000 right now for this purpose. Wire it to me right away. And so they learn enough to figure out what's going on. They monitor their Facebook or their LinkedIn to say, hey, he's at a conference in Rio. Now's the time to make the attack. Real dollars at risk. Back in 2014, the controller at Schooler Corporation, in I think it's Nebraska, got a message from the CEO's Gmail account. On a weekend, we're about to do a deal in China. We're purchasing a company. We need to make a payment right away. We're working with a consultant from the Big Four. I won't put a name in because somebody's going to run around later and say, Roman said you did this. It's not what I'm saying. The consultant's contact information is below. Connect with him. He has the wiring instructions. And so the controller fell for it, contacted the person based on what was listed, and they wired out $17 million. Oh, by the way, you can't tell anybody or we violate SEC disclosure rules. So never use email as the sole method of authorization. We can spoof email. It's not hard to do. We can break into somebody's personal email. It's not hard to do because most people for their personal email don't choose good passwords. You need to verbally verify the source of the email for financial transactions. We also see attacks where, you know, the old macros are back. They embed code or a macro in a Word or an Excel document. Hey, here is the second quarter projections and budget. Open the attached spreadsheet, verify it, save it, and send me back any comments you have. What do we do about phishing? I have a personal security mantra, and Eric can testify to this. I'm the most paranoid guy in any room. That's what I'm paid to be. Personal security. I do not open attachments I was not expecting. I don't care if it comes from Eric, my partner Mark Ike, my wife. I don't open attachments I was not expecting. I verify it. It takes 2 extra minutes of inconvenience, but it's well worth the risk that entails. I don't follow links in emails I was not expecting. If it's really important, I'll go to the bookmark site I have, or I'll Google up and see if this is a fraud scam. Take the 2 minutes of inconvenience and figure out if it's legitimate. We need to take that on as a personal mantra. We need to empower our staff, our employees, our coworkers to take on the 2 minutes of inconvenience. We see the same thing with phone calls. I can call and talk somebody through what's the effect of a telemarketer script, and if I catch them in a weak moment, they'll visit a website, download, and run something for me. Same effect. They'll end up on a website that looks just like this. The only telltale sign here is the fact that the link up at the top is not really Microsoft.com. What do we do about all this? Again, we need users that are aware and savvy. I can make your computers bulletproof. We turn them off, we unplug them, and we throw them into the bottom of the pool. Problem is the users can't really get their job done then. So we have to give them access. We have to teach them what's important, why it's important, and what their role is, so they can safeguard their access. Then IT in the background can harden and secure things and monitor things. And then we need to be prepared for when these events occur. Kind of like the fire department. When you have a fire and you call the fire department, you don't expect them to show up at your house and learn for the first time how to fight a fire. That you expect them to have special tools and training and do a practice before. So we combat this phishing with training of our users, and then we look in the background to secure our systems. SANS is an independent organization, been around for a long time. They have something called the 20 critical controls. These have been around for over a dozen years. They've gone through several variations, and they have been vetted across a wide variety of industries and a variety of different sized organizations. These controls work. What we have here is our 80-20 rule. If we can address these first 5, you will take care of 80% of your problems. So we start with secure standard configurations. If I don't need an application or service, it should be turned off. If I have defaults for user accounts and passwords, they need to be changed. There are hardening checklists already in existence. Your IT folks do not need to create these from scratch. At the end of the slide deck, there's links to 2 different places that have these hardening checklists. We need a process to patch and update our operating systems and our applications. This takes time and effort. There's no way around it. We need to keep our systems patched and updated. IT needs to have the time and the resources to do this. We need to strongly consider what's a process called application whitelisting. The concept of a whitelist is to say, okay, there's 200, and I'm making an analogy here. There's 200 executables that ship with the Windows operating system. Our people only need access to 40 of them. The 40 go on the whitelist and they're allowed. The other ones are not allowed. They can't access them. And so if the malware tries to access the unpatched vulnerability in one of these other ones, which is the way a lot of this works, it doesn't function because the user doesn't have access to the things that are not on the whitelist. Here's the good news. Windows ships with native functionality to manage application whitelisting. You can do this through group Active Directory and group policy. You can buy third-party applications that will manage it for you. But here's the bad news. That takes time and effort. Somebody needs to be knowledgeable enough to either set up and run it natively, or you have to purchase and install and manage the applications from the third party. Last one. This is key and critical. If you can remove local admin rights, you make it significantly harder for the hackers. It raises the bar. You need to look at this and say the bottom line is no browsing the internet, no use of email with administrator level credentials. Now, frequently IT shops set up users to be local administrators on their local PC in front of them to make application functionality easy and seamless and not have any conflicts. If you're local administrator, everything works and everything talks to everything. We need to move to a model where our users don't have administrative privileges, and that may take some time and effort configuring the applications differently. It used to be very common to see applications require the users to be local admin. That's not nearly the case anymore. It's just easier to do it that way. We talked about many of these, so a lot of this is just review. Users that are aware and savvy, filtering capabilities, minimum access rights, validated backup and restore. So a big piece of this I kind of just hinted at. We've got three areas here: people, rules, and tools. The rules are the policies for how we're going to function and carry out business. What do we expect? How should things be run? How do we interact? The auditors will tell you if it's not documented or written down, if there isn't a policy, then it isn't followed consistently. You could argue, well, it's a policy, but it's not followed consistently. Well, the reality is if it's not a policy and it's not documented, there is no consistency. Even if it is documented, we can have situations inconsistent, but our chances are much better. So policies to set the foundation, train the users. What's important? What's their role? What do we expect? So that they can recognize. And in the back end, we can configure the system to support that. And then we have to develop procedures for when an incident occurs. Do we have the resources in-house to manage these incidents ourselves? Do we need to have a third party ready to go? You're much better off if you have identified that third party who can perform incident response ahead of time than saying, okay, we just had this happen, who do we call? And we look up Ghostbusters in a phone book. Guess what? If you pre-vet two companies ahead of time, you might be able to negotiate their rates. If you call them tomorrow because ransomware has been in for a week and you can't access your systems, you're going to pay whatever they tell you to pay. And then validate your controls. Usually in a room, I'd say raise your hand if you're a controller, you're in finance. A lot of people raise your room. I said, who thinks it's a good idea for the people who manage the books to validate at the end of the year everything's good? And everybody shakes their head. No, of course not. Well, we need to do the same thing with our IT function. We need to validate that the IT systems operate the way we expect, that the controls function, and there aren't exceptions that we either aren't aware of or we don't. You know, we might be aware of the exceptions. We don't understand what the risk of those exceptions are. Anybody feel like this? I'll pause for questions. I'll tell you there's good news. This is manageable. I'm a silver lining guy. Two good thing. It was hard to get my son to pose for this picture. But he's still holding on, and we're coming in for the ride, so the ride's almost over. We can manage this. So I don't know if I wasn't looking correctly, but I don't see any questions in the comment box. But if anybody has questions, I can field them now either by answering the prompts, or I don't know if people can somehow voice them verbally. I don't know.
Randy, I do have this is Eric, and I do have one follow-up that one of the comments you made sort of sparked some of the conversation we were having in some roundtables earlier that led to this webinar. and that is a lot of our members, a lot of the NTMA members will have a third-party service provider that provides network administration support services, might even do some of the system updates, things like that. And one of the questions that came up previously is how do I know if my third-party service provider that I'm already paying to help me with some of these items is covering what needs to be covered relative to security? And I'm going to stop there, and then I've got a follow-up question if you answer that.
Well, classic consultant's answer is it depends. I mean, unless you do something to validate it, you don't know. So what do you do to validate? There's a variety of mechanisms. These are easier to do if you set the expectation up front when you RFP and vet proposals and go through the contracting process. Now, some of you might be in a situation where I've already contracted with them, but we re-sign the contract every year. Perfect. Okay. Next time the contract's due, we need to do some renegotiation. So what do? We can require some form of third-party validation that they have appropriate procedures and security in place, that they actually have some testing occur. You can ask for their security compliance reports. They might have to be PCI compliant. So you want to see that. You could require them to. You could require some form of independent third-party testing. So you could engage somebody to test your systems that they manage for you. There's a variety of things to do, but they all come down to some level of validation. Test it, review it, assess it. Somebody other than the bookkeeper needs to validate that the books are in order. Make sense?
Yeah, it does. And the follow-up question that I have is as you were talking, you skipped over it briefly, but you were talking about the pre-scripted calls.
Yep.
And as I was thinking about the number of our members that use third-party service providers, that would be a logical place for a pre-scripted call to come from a bad guy, right?
Yep. Yep.
It says, I'm Joe at so-and-so. I've already gone into the system. I can see the vendor listing. I know which groups you're working with. And I call up somebody and say, hey, we're doing some local desktop maintenance. Please follow this link and we'll get your system updated for your latest Microsoft patches. Some other script. And so I just want to remind everybody on the call that if you are using a third-party provider, those verbal checks, those secondary validations become really, really important.
Yeah, it's kind of like I talked about my personal security mantra. Anytime somebody contacts you, you need to validate the authenticity, the validity of the request. If you got a call from somebody claiming, let's say you bank with Wells Fargo, and out of the blue you get a call from Wells Fargo saying, hey, this is Sally from Wells Fargo. We've detected some potentially fraudulent activity in your account. We really want to get on top of this. Did you do this? And you say, no. Okay, well, give me your account number and password so that we can reset it for you. Hopefully you would stop and say, you called me, not the other way around. What's your name and number? I'll call you back. You hang up and you call Wells Fargo based on the number on the back of your card or by typing in wellsfargo.com and going straight to the website and pulling the number up there. So anytime one person calls another and the person receiving the call is asked to do something, they need to validate before they do it. Visit this website, download and run this update, give me your password. Oh, hey, there's my calendar. You guys don't want to see that. Other questions? If you do have a question later on, comes up, don't want to ask it in front of the group, there's my contact info. Happy to respond to questions. If anybody would like this slide deck, send me an email. I'll come back to this in a second. There's the page with the links I was referring to. There's a page on breach analysis reports, very informative about what's going on, and then some strategies more specifically around what do we do to defend against and respond to ransomware. So again, there's the contact info with my email address. I'll send you the presentation. If you send me an email asking for the presentation, I'll send it back to you, and it will not have malware in it. So I'll close with this. Again, I do a lot of in-person presentations, and when I do it in person, I start out the presentation like this. I say, "Raise your hand if you're a technology company." They all look at me like, "Romus, you're in the wrong section. Technology companies is down the hall." It's like, no, bear with me. You know, usually I get one or two people raise their hand. I'm like, "Okay, put your hands down. Stand up if your company would be, pardon my language, SOL, if you can't use your computer systems for a week or two." And they all, you see the dynamic, stand up, and you know, invariably there'll be a few people who don't stand up. I say, "I respectfully call all of those, sit down, you're a liar." Your technology company, whether you like it or not, tremendously dependent on our information systems. You know, a lot of our manufacturing clients, their systems are highly automated now. That malware gets in there and encrypts them and locks up the operating systems. You can't produce your goods. You can't execute your business. How long can you go without being able to do that? So whether you like it or not, you're a technology company. We need to get more mature in our IT operational security management and our due diligence of our third parties. And I know a firm who can help. There's lots of firms actually that can do this. So find somebody you know that you can work with and get your systems looked at, get your processes looked at. Eric, anything else you want to add? Any color? Nikki, you there? We done?
I'm sorry, Randy, I was on mute. I believe we're wrapped up at this point in time. If there's any follow-up questions, please reach out to Randy, and I believe we'll have a recording of this webcast available. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.